Alright, today is day one of class 102, Roman and Greek mythology. Today, we learned about what a myth is and what differentiates it from a legend and a folk tale. Learned about some important people in the past and uh present, I guess. Different strategies or methods on figuring out what is and isn't a myth. Um, and then the history of myths going all the way back. So first, we started with William R. Bascom. William R. Bascom. And he was, I think, one of the first people to differentiate what it meant to be a myth. Um, he differentiated them by characters. Um, so you got myth. And he differentiated them by the characters that appear in them, so whether or not they are humans. Um, he also what time period they appeared in, so like whether they're like our time or outside our time, like supernatural. Um, and whether or not audiences believed it to be true. Um, and those were like the main three that he kind of actually he also talked about attitude and whether they were regarded as sacred. Um, because I guess things that like folklore and myth are not um, considered sacred. Um, oh yeah, right. This guy, he had limits to what he described as a myth, like some problems. And another guy that we'll talk about later also faced some similar problems. One of the limits was that his method of distinguishing what a myth is only applicable to prose narratives, which restricts art and literature. So I guess um, it was only verbal stuff that he was talking about. Another limit was that it only uh, limits myth to people who are supernatural or exist in different times. So like beings and time were big because I guess there were myths that didn't follow this rule. And he also assumed that myths function to secure or explain religious or sacred beliefs. So myths were more like a way to explain religion um, rather than something else, which we will talk about later. So the distinguishing between the three myths, which is called the three forms of prose narratives. So you've got the three forms um, of prose narratives. And these three were legend, myth, and folktale. So we got Myth, uh, legend, and folktale. And the thing that separated these were myths were um, factual or believed to be factual in the remote past or like outside of our realm. Um, so different place, and they were considered sacred. So you can't you can't diss the myths, and the characters were always non-human. Whereas a legend was also considered to be factual, um, but uh, is considered to be in recent time compared to the myth's remote time. Um, and they're considered to be in the world of today, so in our realm. They also were considered secular or sacred, so I guess it can be both. So it could be sacred or secular. And the principal characters were always human. But for folktale, they were always considered to be fiction, which I don't really understand because I feel like there's folktale that people believe to be real, but and the folktale can take place anytime, any place. Um, and they were considered secular, so they were not sacred. And they could be of humans or non-humans. Another important figure during this time, when deciding what a myth is, was Con Cupid. So Con Cupid. His definition overlapped with Bascom, so it's very similar. He also believed that it was traditional, sacred, but he kind of brought up anonymous authorship. Um, but his and Bascom's mainly overlapped. So they faced a lot of the same limits where they both believed that um, it only belonged to superhumans, or like they only talked about superhumans, and that myths are sacred, and that they represent. Actually, I think this is something that differs between the two, but he believed that myths served to represent beliefs shared by a group or society rather than explain a religion. Um, so if I'll just write it over here somewhere. Um, explain society beliefs. And he also assumed that myths, like, actually, no, he believed the same thing. He believed that myths function to secure or explain religious or sacred beliefs. Um, so I would essentially say that they're like one and the same. Um, but kind of separate from them, but still about what a myth is, was another guy. This guy was called William G. Doughty. William G. Doughty developed a different way of analyzing what is and isn't a myth that included things like art and written stuff. And to do this, he developed um, the the mythological corpus, or the definition of a mythological corpus. Um, mythological corpus. He also, I guess he didn't really coin it, but he started mythography, which was the study of myths and rituals. But the mythological corpus, essentially, the definition of it can be divided into three parts. So a myth's form, which can be um, written, or it can be in art or images. But they're always like big picture in the message, like it's not straightforward. Um, but you also have the content of the mythological corpus, which again isn't surface level. It's usually meanings that connects to bigger pictures. Um, so it's not surface level. Um, and then you have the function. So what is the function of the mythological corpus? And I think the function is like to get you to think about your perspective, or like your situation in terms of like the grand scheme. So like explain the working cosmos and all its constituents. Um, so essentially, the mythological corpus is like a science that um, provides a system of interpreting individual experience with a universal perspective. So I think that's kind of the focal point, is for you to have a universal perspective. But moving on from what a myth is, we will move into classical mythology. Um, and I think we'll start with what it means for this mythology to be classic. So, classic refers to it, like a specific thing being superior, or like better than everything else in its class. So it's considered to be a classic. So yeah, it exemplifies the best qualities of a particular group. So best quality of group. Um, Ancient Greeks referred to the places where Greeks lived, which includes modern Greece, modern Turkey, and edges of Italy and coast of the Black Sea. Ancient Greece takes place during the Bronze Age and the Roman conquest of Greece. The Greeks shared a group identity even though they all lived in different city states, but their identity is more defined by their shared language, religion, and way of life rather than where they lived. And so I don't really know how this ties into myth from ancient Greece, but I guess it's just setting the stage of like maybe I oh yeah, because this is like when you before um, any writings, I guess. Um, because in the archaic period, so you have kind of like this timeline of events. We have ancient Greece, and then it goes down to the archaic period. And during the archaic period, we have the Iliad and the Odyssey, which I cannot wait for that movie. But you have the Iliad and the Odyssey. They were originally oral compositions. They were written in hexameter, and they're attributed to Homer, but Homer represents more of like generations of anonymous people who performed poems in the style of Homer. Um, we don't know when they were written. It is attributed to like two kind of closer things. Some people believe that it's attributed to, oh, I don't know how to say this guy's names. Pacey Stratus. So it might be attributed to Paceystratus, but also its writing is closer to the time where the Greeks had adopted the Phoenician alphabet. So, um, Greek adoption of Phoenician alphabet. So it's still kind of unknown when exactly it was written, but this archaic period also included Homeric hymns, which were poems of varying length in hexameter verse composed in the same manner as Homer's epics. And they're usually dedicated to a god or goddess, and they preceded the performance of epics. Hymns. And then another piece of work that was written during this time was Theogony and Works and Days. Theogony and Works and Days. This was written by Hesiod, who I imagine I'm gonna see a lot of during this time. Also hexameter. Let me actually write hexameter in the corner over here. Hexameter. But the point of this was that it was orally composed by poets and eventually recorded in writing, and that it was similar to Homer's poem. So I guess it was important because it was similar to Homer. An important person during this time was Herodotus. Herodotus. This guy said that Hesiod and Homer described the genealogical relations among gods and goddesses and detailed their appearance and traits. Early Greek poets were important in creating a framework in which local deities could be located and organized. And because Greeks lived in small communities, gods and their characteristics varied from city to city due to different poets. So this guy kind of just described why he just described like how because they were city states and they weren't in one location, each city state had different or same gods with different characteristics. Um, because it was so early, it was mainly just like a framework of gods being developed in each city. So I will just write like local. It was kind of his thing. Recitations of Homer and Hesiod contributed to the transformation of local deities into gods recognizable to all Greeks. They were recited in Pan-Hellenic sanctuaries during festivals that Greeks from all over the world would visit. So this is kind of the period where it started to get spread the most. Like it started to get built up and spread. Um, so I'll write like event reading, I guess. It was like framework and popularizing. Um, and Pan-Hellenic, what did I say? I said Pan-Hellenic refers to all Greek. So Pan-Hellenic sanctuaries were Greek sanctuaries. Moving on to the classical period. During this period, oh right, this is, I don't know whether this is the Renaissance or before the Renaissance, but there was essentially an increased interest in creativity and like intellectual activities like math and philosophy. Um, and they started to critique and analyze and examine their own myths. So, kind of trying to understand what they mean, why they're important. Um, so, I'll just write like, I don't know how to spell Renaissance. Hopefully, future me will be able to read that. Some important people were, wow, I don't know how to say this name. Aeschylus. We've got Aeschylus, Sophocles, Sophocles, and Euripides. Euripides. They all composed plays about gods and goddesses. Herodotus is back here. Herodotus is back. Composed and recited his histories, which were devoted to the Persian Wars, but contained stories about the gods. So he was kind of Persian Wars, but they also pertained to the gods. And yeah, these guys kind of just wrote poems. There was a temple called Parthenon. Parthenon. Sounds like I have a lisp. Parthenon. It was a temple that depicted gods with sculptures. So the Greeks were like interrogating myths and what they mean, what their importance was. And they developed two terms called logoi and mythos. Logoi was a term that logoi or lugoi? Logoi. Logoi is like refers to logic, so it's like fact-based argument. So it's like rational thinking. And they also developed the term mythos, which refers to myths. And this was important because When engaging in an argument, they would say that using like rational argument was logoi because you could give reason and explanation for your position, whereas muthos is like, well, this myth says so. So there were like two sides that some were like, yeah, like these myths are super important, and another side that was like, no, these myths are bad. Some of the people on the side that said these myths are bad were Plato and Protagoras. So we got Protagoras. Protagoras. So, and this guy essentially was like a renowned philosopher and teacher. And he said that man is the measure of all things. So he had a big emphasis on man and humans rather than the gods. He kind of cast them aside. And Plato saw the importance of the gods and how they influence people's behaviors. He said he would ban the gods in his own ideal city, but he ended up creating his own myths and traditions to push his own uh, philosophical views, which included the myth of and the myth of Atlantis. I don't know whether this is the same Atlantis that we know now, but there's this other guy as well who actually did not approve of what was going on. He didn't approve myths. This guy's name was Palefatus. Palefatus. This guy collected and debunked myths. That was kind of his thing. I guess something that was important to him was the trial of Socrates, who openly mocked the gods, more like he challenged their existence, and he got killed for it. But moving past this period, we've got the Hellenistic period and beyond. So we've got the Hellenistic period. Oh, I think, yeah, so this was like when the myths started to be like collected and imitated from different parts of the world. So this is like a collection and imitate kind of thing. Collect, imitate. There were like from what I'm seeing, there's like four important people. One of them was Callimachus. I feel like I've read of this guy somewhere. Callimachus. Callimachus composed hymns dedicated to the gods, but the hymns were witty and full of references. So he did witty hymns. And there was Apollonius of Rhodes, or I don't know if I would call him Apollonius. Apollonius sounds better. Apollonius of Rhodes. And he composed a relatively short epic in hexameters called Argonautica about Jason's quest with his Argonauts for the Golden Fleece. The weak-willed protagonist bears little resemblance to Homer's heroes. I'm not exactly sure what this is in reference to, but I'm just gonna write down that he wrote an epic called Argonautica. Holy shit. I just just got a message from somebody. Scared the shit out of me. But during this time, we also have Plutarch, who I also feel like I've read about somewhere. His main thing was he wrote treatises on Delphi, biographies of famous Greek and Roman statesmen, and treatises on Greek, Roman, and Egyptian philosophy, theology, and customs. So he was like treatises guy. Treatises. And I don't. Yeah, this is a person. Pausanias. What a name. Pausanias traveled throughout Greece, describing its temples, buildings, and customs, thus preserving many features of Greek culture. So he was like a preserver. The Greek Empire became Christianized during this time, and the Greek mythological system became. What is this word? Quiescent. Quiescent, which describes a state of quiet inactivity or dormancy. So because it was kind of taken over by Rome, Christianity started to take over. Classical mythology is the study of myths and tales that the Greeks themselves labeled mythoi. But moving out of myths that are like primarily in Greece, we got myths from the ancient Near East. Before I go further, let me just message this guy back and tell him I'll be ready for scheduled time. Or I'll be there. Scheduled time. Gotta do something first. Playing Battlefield, trying to get the achievements. But the myths in the ancient Near East. So the ancient Near East was a large geographical region that had 4 areas. These 4 areas were each had their own mythological corpus, and I think they each developed differently in terms of like their writing systems and hierarchical structures. So some of them developed writing faster than others. Greece was relatively new to the area, and almost all of those areas were ruled for thousands of years by people who believed they were sacred, so by kings. But the area in the north was called Anatolia or Asia Minor, but I think for this we're gonna call it Anatolia, which was north. To the south we had Egypt. In the west is Levant. I don't know whether it's either Levant or Levant, which is made up of modern day Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, and Palestine. Free Palestine. In the east, we have Mesopotamia. I know how to say that one. Mesopotamia. In the east. During the Bronze Age, when Greece was ruled by kings, it interacted with the East through war, trade, travel, and migration. And the Greek cities closest to the ancient Near East shared language. And finally, we're gonna go big on Anatolia, which was controlled by the Hittite Empire. For a long time. The Hittite Empire. during this time, some important myths came out, um, which were the Song of Kumarbri. Song of Kumarbri. And the Song of Ulikumi. Song of Ulikumi, and both of these depicted gods. That's why they're important. But they also bear similar resemblances to Hesiod's Theogony, which raises question to the Eastern influence on Hesiod's tale. So they have some kind of interaction with Hesiod's tale. Scholars have suggested that Apollo's origin is the Hittite god Apollonius. So we've got Apollo and Apollonius. The name Apollonius appears in a treaty between the Hittite king and Prince Alexandus of Walusa. Scholars think that the name appearing in the treaty is why Apollo protects Troy in Homer's Iliad, and that the Prince of Walusa was Troy. So connecting this to Homer's Iliad, and Troy. So there seems to be some connection between these two areas. And then finally, in another side of Anatolia, we have the Phrygian kingdom. The Phrygian kingdom. This kingdom was in central and west Anatolia, and it had many cultural exchanges with Greece. Homer's Iliad depicts them fighting alongside the Trojans against the Greeks. So they're depicted in Homer's Iliad. They were conquered multiple times, but it seems like their importance is about the Great Mother, who was a huge religious figure, a considerable religious phenomenon in the Mediterranean region. Forms of her worship were adopted in both Greece and the Roman Empire. So in Greece, Rome, and the Mediterranean. And that seems to be it for today. I have a lot of reading to do tomorrow, which I'm not looking forward to. Taking this was 6 pages worth of stuff that I've written down. I don't know how many pages of the textbook I read, but I'm low-key already falling behind. So hopefully I'll be able to lock in tomorrow. But that means the video that I upload tomorrow might be more than 40 minutes long. So that is fun. But yeah, that's about it.